Hey guys, what's going on? It's Clever Techie, and in this video, we're gonna learn jQuery. No, I'm just kidding. Hey guys, what's going on? It's Clever Techie, and in this video, we're gonna learn jQuery. jQuery makes it much faster and easier to write JavaScript, so we should definitely use it when writing JavaScript. And what it really is, it's a JavaScript library of code that lets us write less JavaScript and do more with just a few lines of code. And so jQuery simplifies JavaScript code writing by making things like Ajax requests, animation, and DOM manipulation a lot easier to do. So if we're going to be using JavaScript, we should definitely use jQuery. Now let's go over the syntax. So here you can see what the full jQuery statement looks like. And it consists of a $, selector, method, and parameter. First, we have a $, to access or define jQuery, so that lets the browser know that we're going to be coding in jQuery. Then inside the round brackets, we have a selector which selects an HTML element. And we do this in exactly the same way that we would do it in CSS. So if you guys are familiar with cascading style sheets, this is going to be really easy for you to understand. Then we follow that by the dot and then the method. And the method is called on the selected element. So this method is going to be applied to this HTML element that we're going to be selecting. And then inside the round brackets, once again, we specify the optional parameter and end the statement with a semicolon. Now the parameter can be optional, so there can be nothing at all here. And the method can also accept other variable types like objects, arrays, integers, and even other methods. So that's what the full jQuery statement looks like. And if you guys memorize this part and understand what's going on here, then learning the rest of jQuery is going to be really easy. So here's an acronym for you to memorize the jQuery statement. Dr. Smith doesn't make pretty snowmen. So $, selector, dot, method, parameter, and semicolon. So you can use that to memorize the whole jQuery syntax. And here's what the actual code example looks like. So first we got a $, to access jQuery. Then inside the round brackets we have our HTML element. And in this case we're selecting all the paragraph tags on the page. And you gotta make sure that the selector is inside the double or single quotes. Then we follow that by the dot and the method name, which is add class. Then we add round brackets, and inside those round brackets we have our optional parameter, which is blue background. So what this statement is going to do, it's going to add class with a name blue background to all the paragraph tags on our page. Okay, so that's what jQuery syntax looks like. Make sure to memorize it. Use the acronym. Dr. Smith doesn't make pretty snowmen. Now let's go over some of the other ways to use selectors. And if you guys are familiar with CSS, and you should be if you're learning about jQuery, then all of these should look really familiar to you because we're selecting those HTML elements in the same exact way that we would do with CSS. So this one right here selects all the elements that have class power. The next one, #about, is going to select a single element with the ID about. The div is going to select all the divs. Div.power is going to select the div with the class power. And then finally footer a.boss is going to select all the links with the class boss that are inside the footer. Okay, now let's go over the jQuery events and animation. So events and animation still both fall under the methods, and I've highlighted methods in purple, so nothing has changed about our syntax. We still have our purple method after the selector. Though you may have noticed that now inside of the method, instead of the parameter, we actually have a function. So you may be asking yourself, what's going on here? And so remember how I said that the parameter is optional and that we can have objects, arrays, and other functions within the method? So that's exactly what I meant. So instead of the parameter, we now have a function. And this function syntax, function round brackets, and then curly brackets, the syntax is exactly the same as JavaScript. So actually, this function here is not jQuery anymore, it's JavaScript. And so jQuery just comes with its own way to select HTML elements, and it comes with a whole library of methods. But what jQuery intrinsically is just JavaScript. And so we combine any functionality of JavaScript within our jQuery, like functions, loops, if statements, arrays, objects, and all of the other JavaScript syntax is going to be exactly the same because we're still using JavaScript within jQuery. So what this code does here, it selects all the HTML element buttons on the page, and on the event the user clicks on one of those buttons, we call a function, and then we can do anything else within that function call. In this example down below, we are selecting a div with a class name myForm, and on the event a user submits that form, we call a function, and then we do something else when the user submits a form. The next one is hover, and this is when the user hovers the mouse over an element with the ID main. So we call a function and do something else when the user hovers over an HTML element. And finally, we are selecting an HTML element with class power, and we are calling a function when the user types something inside of that text box, because key up method works when the user is typing on the keyboard. So all the events are methods that describe some kind of action that the user is performing on the page. Alright, now let's go over some of the other methods, and these ones fall under the category of animation. So here what we're doing is we're selecting all the paragraph tags on the page, and we're using a method called slide toggle with the parameter slow, which is slowly going to toggle, which means hide or show, and slide the paragraph tag into view with this method. And down here we're pretty much doing the same thing. We're using slide toggle method, but instead of the slow parameter we're specifying an integer, which is the number in milliseconds, I believe, that the animation should be performed in. And after our parameter we see a comma here followed by the function call so that we can do something when the slide animation is complete. So this is a way to call the function after we have called the method and after it has finished doing whatever it's supposed to do. Next we got a slide up method, which hides the element with a sliding motion, and here again we're specifying the parameter followed by the function call so that we can do something else after the animation is complete. And finally, down here we have fade toggle, which displays or hides elements by animating their opacity. And once again we're using parameter slow and call a function so that we can do something else after the animation has been completed. Now over here at the top you can see how to actually include jQuery library, and we include this script tag in the head tag of our HTML page. Now let's go ahead and do the really fun part and code in jQuery, and that's where a lot of these concepts are going to really click for you guys. So I've already created a very basic HTML template, and I've also created a games.json file, which is the same exact file with the same JSON content that we used in the JSON tutorial for beginners video. And I've included this code in the description of this video, so you guys can go ahead and copy it from the description and paste it into your file. Okay, so inside the head tag, I'm gonna go ahead and paste the jQuery library URL, and now we are ready to start working with jQuery. But before we do, we need to have some more HTML elements to work with. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a div with ID equals about, and I'm also gonna give it some CSS styling. This is gonna be inline CSS. Gonna give it a height of 150 pixels. Gonna set the width to 300 pixels. Gonna set the background color to light green. I'm gonna set the text align property to center, and I'm gonna set padding to 10 pixels. Close the div tag, and now we have this delicious looking green box on our page that we can start working with. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and open up the script tag in the same exact way we would do if we were coding JavaScript. And now, before any jQuery code, we actually have to make sure that the document and all of the HTML elements have been fully loaded, because we don't want to be selecting the element when it's not loaded yet. And for that, we're going to use a jQuery statement, and for the selector, we're going to use a document. And we're going to use the method called ready. And inside this method, we're going to call a function which is going to contain the rest of our jQuery code. So I'm going to press enter and then close the curly bracket of the function, and then we're going to end the statement with a semicolon. So if we look at the DOM chart that I've created for you guys, you can see that the document is at the very top. So we are calling the method ready to make sure the document is fully ready and loaded before working with any of the other HTML elements. Okay, so that's what this statement is for. Okay, so now we're gonna select our about div with $, hashtag about, and we're gonna use a click event so that whenever a user clicks on our div, we're gonna call a function. Okay, so now that we're calling a function on click event, so whenever a user clicks on our about div, we're gonna add some text to our div. And for that, we're just gonna use $, and then use the keyword this. So this just refers to the current element. So there's no need to specify hashtag about again, because jQuery knows, since we are already within that selector, it's going to select the same exact HTML element, which is this. And I've actually gone ahead and added it here under selectors, so you guys can see that this selects the current HTML element. So that is what this is. So we're gonna say this, which is again referring to our about div, and this time we're gonna use a method HTML, and we're gonna set its parameter to whatever text we like. I'm just gonna say you clicked me. So jQuery's HTML method sets the inner HTML of the HTML element that we're selecting in the same way that JavaScript's property of inner HTML would do. So here on the DOM chart, you can see that we can have an element, which can be any HTML element, and the jQuery's way is to use a method HTML, and JavaScript's way is to use inner HTML property. So that is the difference between the two. And now let's go ahead and give this a test run. Gonna go ahead and refresh the page, click on the div, and now we have our text showing up. You clicked me, so our jQuery code is working. Okay, so now I'm gonna be adding some other jQuery statements, and I'm gonna be moving a lot faster because now we understand the whole syntax, so it's just gonna be pretty much the same thing when it comes to the concepts. It's just gonna be different functionality. So let's go ahead and add a hover event to our div and change its background color. So we're gonna type up $ about to select the about div, and this time we're gonna use a hover method and specify the function inside the hover event. Close the statement with a semicolon, and once again we're gonna use this selector to select the current element, and we're gonna use a CSS method to change the CSS of the current element, and we're gonna set the background color value to light blue. Now let's go ahead and test this. Hover the mouse over the div, and now it changes the color to light blue. So that's working. Now let's add another statement to change the color back to light green when the mouse leaves the div. Gonna select about, and this time we're gonna use a method called mouse leave. Call the function inside of the event. And again, we're gonna use this selector, call the CSS method. And this time we're gonna set the background color to light green to reset it back to its original color. Now refresh the page, roll the mouse over the div, and it changes its color to blue. Roll the mouse out, and it changes its color back to green. Now let's go ahead and add some HTML buttons right underneath the div, which are going to show, hide, and toggle our div. So the first button we're gonna make is gonna have an ID show. It's gonna show our div. Gonna copy this, paste it again. And the second button is going to be hide. And the third one is going to be toggle, which is going to show and hide our div. So we're going to name it toggle. And now we're going to add jQuery to select our buttons and add functionality, which is going to show, hide, and toggle the div. So the first button we're going to select is show, with a pound show, and we're gonna use click method. Inside the click method, we're gonna call a function, and here we're going to select our about div, and we're gonna use a method called show, which is not gonna have any parameters in it. It's just a method by itself. I'm gonna paste it twice to make things a little faster. So this, I'm just gonna rename it to hide and rename the method to hide as well. So here we're just selecting the hide button, and we're using a method called hide to hide the div. And this one is going to be targeting toggle, and the method is going to be toggle as well. So that's gonna hide and show the div. Okay, so first I'm gonna hide the div, show the div, and then toggle the div, which shows and hides the div. So everything is working. Now let's go ahead and add a text box HTML element. Give it a class power and set its value to empty string. And we're gonna use this text box to type in it and then set the value of our div's text at the same time that we're typing. So first of all, we're gonna select our text box, and since we're using a class, we're gonna select it with dot power. Then we're gonna use the method key up, call the function. And so now that we're inside of our text box, we have selected power, text box, and we're accessing the key up property, which is when the user is typing inside of the text box. We are now ready to select our about div and set whatever text that the user is typing to the same value as the text inside the power. Alright, so the first thing we're gonna do is select our about div, and we're gonna use HTML method. And remember, HTML method is how we set the element's inner HTML. And inside of this method, what we want to do is select our power class with this current element, and then use a method called val. And what this does is it gets our element's value. So this is going to set our about div's inner HTML to whatever the user is typing inside of the text box. Okay, let's give it a test run, refresh the page, and we can start typing whatever in the text box. Okay, so all of that is working. Let's keep going. Alright, so now I want to show you guys how easy it is to add JavaScript inside of our jQuery. And we're going to make it so that when the user clicks on the div again, it's going to change the text to something else. And for that, we're going to add an if statement inside of our about div's click event. And we're going to say if, and inside of our statement, we're going to select the current div with this keyword, and we're going to use HTML method to get its actual content, and we're going to say if the content is already equal to you clicked me, which is the original text. So if the user already clicked on the div, we're going to change the text to something else. We're going to say this HTML, and we're going to set it to clicked me again. And that's how easy it is to do that. And so if the HTML is not equal to you clicked me, we're going to say else, and we're just going to set it back to you clicked me. Alright, so I'm going to refresh the page. And if you keep clicking on the div, it's going to keep changing the text. Alright, so the last thing I want to show you guys is how easy it is to make Ajax calls using jQuery. And for that, we're going to go ahead and add a couple more buttons. Just going to copy these two. And I'm going to name the first one Get JSON, which is going to get the JSON content of our games.json file. And the second one is going to get a single game by converting that JSON into a JavaScript object, and then we're going to extract a single value from the object. Alrighty, now let's go ahead and code the Ajax. Okay, so first we're going to select our get JSON button, gonna add click method, gonna add the function inside of the click method, and inside of this function we're gonna use $.ajax. And so this is a way to call a method without using any HTML selector inside of Ajax. So we simply omit any selector, and we just call the method by itself without any HTML selector. So this is how we call the Ajax method. Now inside of the Ajax method, it works by accepting an object. And so the objects in JavaScript are enclosed in curly braces. So the first value pair that we're going to specify is URL, and the value for this one is going to be games.json. So that's going to go ahead and grab the file in a method type get. And the second value we're going to specify is success. So success means what is going to happen after a successful Ajax request. So on success, we're going to call a function, and we're going to pass a result parameter inside of the function, which is going to be the result returned by the Ajax request. So that's just going to contain Ajax response. And then inside of this function, we can go ahead and set our about div's text value to whatever is returned by this Ajax request. So we're going to select our about div Now the result is going to automatically convert our JSON formatted text into a JavaScript object. So in order to convert it back into a text, if we want to set our abouts inner HTML to that JSON, we first need to convert it back into text. And for that, you may remember from the JavaScript video, we can use json.stringify and then specify the object null for, and that's gonna convert the object back to text. And actually, let's not forget to close the object down here with a curly brace. Okay, so let's go ahead and give it a test. Refresh the page, click on get JSON, and I also made a little mistake up here, so I'm gonna delete this A here. So refresh the page, click on get JSON, and now we have our div set to the JSON content of the games.json file. And the last thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna do the same thing with the Ajax request, but instead of setting our div to the whole JSON, we're gonna work with the actual JavaScript object and extract a single value out of it. So I'm just gonna copy this whole thing, and instead of get JSON button, we're gonna use get game, which is our other button. And then I'm just gonna delete this part here and leave the rest. So since our result is an object, we can go ahead and extract values from it in the same exact way we would do in JavaScript. And here we're gonna create a new variable called game, and we're gonna say result.games, and remember that games is an array, so we're gonna access its first value, which is gonna be this first object here, and then we're gonna access the title property of that object, which is gonna be Witcher 3. So we're gonna say dot title, and then we're gonna set our abouts HTML to game. So that should set it to Witcher 3. Alright, let's see if this works. Refresh the page, click on get game, and now we got Witcher 3 and everything is working. And that's it for this jQuery tutorial for beginners video. I hope you guys liked it. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Clever Techie out.